1. I've had weird occurrences happen to me for years. Some that can be explained, others not. I believe I have suffered from sleep paralysis, which could explain a couple of my experiences, but not all. So I'm going to skim over some of my easier explained experiences, and cut to the one experience I can't explain as well. One of the times I saw my demon, he refers to himself as Victor, clear as day, was extremely terrifying. I was walking around my room in the middle of the day, listening to music on my Xbox with a headset on. This is relevant to the story. Usually when I listen to music, it's for inspiration, and I usually pace. In this case, I was pacing in a circle. For reference, my desk, right in front of the window, was opposite to the door, so when I went in circles, I'd spend some time looking at the door, then turn around and look at my desk, and so on. Well, I had been repeating this for a while. I was on the part where I was looking at the door, and all of a sudden, I felt this overwhelming feeling that something was there behind me, watching. I thought to myself, I'm just being paranoid, it's probably nothing. But you should turn around slowly in case something is there. It might sound weird, but in my mind I felt if something was there, it would be easier to ignore if I noticed something out of the corner of my eye, rather than staring it immediately in the face. So I slowly started to turn around, and there he was, crouched on my desk in the middle of the day. I literally fell on my ass. I don't know how long we were staring at each other. Sometimes it feels like it could have been hours. I was paralyzed with fear. He didn't say anything. He just moved in this weird manner, still in place, smiling. Something that to this day I remember as being so disturbing, more disturbing than heinous things I've seen because of the way it made me feel. Eventually I got my wits about me. I scrambled to my feet, throwing my Xbox controller at him as a way to hopefully slow him down if he was to follow me. I got to my door and ran down the hallway towards my grandmother. I told her it was back, and I had just seen it as clear as day. She came in again with me, and nothing was there, just my controller on the floor, with a song playing. One that wasn't on my playlist, a song that shouldn't normally be taken as disturbing, but in this case it was at the time. Funnily enough, it was a song to a Disney Channel original movie, Girl vs. Monster, specifically Fearless. I know it's funny, but it still kinda gives me the creeps that I walked in on the part. I'm stuck in your head, I'm back from the dead, got you running scared. Weird coincidence, right? I suppose you all should know some information pertaining to this entity. He's pretending to be my father. He calls me daughter, and that's something that makes this situation even worse, as they made it more personal, especially considering who he was. You might all be wondering where I heard this, and when he talked to me. But honestly, if I said it, people would take me for even more crazy than I already am. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks for listening to my experience. Any contribution in the comments is very much appreciated, whether you have an opinion, theory, or other. 2. My Uncle Kenny passed away at my house when I was 6 years old. I'm 22 now, while babysitting me. He ended up having a severe brain aneurysm and died. Kenny's close friend ended up stopping by, and when I let her inside, my uncle was lying on the ground. She called 911 and the paramedics rushed over. But it was basically too late. He was on life support at the hospital, but there was no saving him. He technically died in the hospital, but there was just a strange feeling that he passed away at our house. Anyways, after about a week or so went by, my mom was walking around the trail at the neighborhood pond. It was extremely peaceful, and there were no people or anything in sight. My mom was always skeptical when it came to anything paranormal related, but her outlook changed after that walk. She randomly asked Kenny, "If you're here, please give me a sign." Seconds later, a hawk flies over, lands in a nearby tree, and stares at her. She was shocked and confused, but she took that as a sign. It didn't scare her at all, it was actually very comforting. When she told that to the family, everyone thought that she was just struggling with the loss of her brother and brushed it off. I honestly didn't think much of it either. Maybe it was just some kind of coincidence. I mean, there are a lot of birds that fly around that pond, rarely ever hawks, but still. A couple years later, near Kenny's birthday, I was outside helping my mom water the flowers. It was a beautiful summer morning, very peaceful. Nothing out of the ordinary. My mom went inside the house to do the dishes, and I was finishing watering the flowers in the backyard. I'm watering a plant on the deck, and out of nowhere I thought of a memory of when Kenny and I were downstairs watching cartoons. He was being his normal, hilarious self, making me laugh more than the cartoon itself. He would babysit me every other week, and we would always have so much fun. I went to get more water from the faucet, and when I was about to walk down the stairs on the deck, something caught my eye. I looked up, and there was a big hawk sitting on the fence just staring at me. Couldn't have been more than 10 feet away. I dropped the water jug, and I couldn't believe what was happening. I ran back up the stairs to the upper level on the deck, and the hawk was still there looking at me. I told my mom to come outside quick, and she was outside within about 5 seconds. I went to point at the hawk, and it was gone. I mean, completely vanished. Didn't see it flying away or anything. After that experience, I had no choice but to believe what happened to my mom was no coincidence. Over the past years, my mom and I have seen that hawk a few different times, almost always when thinking of Kenny. My grandma also claims to have seen Uncle Kenny Hawk before, and so have a couple of other family members. It's always a comforting feeling, almost like it's telling us that everything is okay. Not sure if it's possibly reincarnation or just a sign of some sort, but either way, it is something that we'll never forget. 3. When I was like 8 or 9, I once saw a young girl weeping while sitting in a crouched-up position in the gully between 2 roads. It was around 8 or 9 p.m., and a rolling blackout was happening, very normal for a third-world country. Although the road lights were still on every road, the one in the gully was not. Everyone thought that the light had reached the end of its lifespan when it first stopped working, and the local government wasn't really interested in fixing it. Again, typical third-world country bullshit. So when the blackout started, my grandma and I, along with all the kids in the neighborhood and a few adults, went out of their homes for some fresh air. The kids were playing with each other, and the adults were gossiping and keeping an eye on the kids. Me being the young and stupid kid I was, I tried to get out of the sight of the adults and go on an adventure. By adventure, I mean walk around the neighborhood. That was the pretext, now for the actual thing. When I entered the gully, it was so dark that I could barely recognize anyone walking on the gully. I say that because there was an unusual number of people walking there, and I could not see anyone's face. My young mind really didn't care about that. All I was thinking was that the environment was very adventurous. Then I noticed that I could not see the road light at the end of the gully, which was supposed to be functional. I thought that it had broken down too, and a small store in the gully was shut down, which it rarely was. I thought all of this while walking towards the end. While I was approaching at the middle part of the gully, I saw a girl crying while in a crouched-up position. All of the people were just ignoring her. I thought that she was some crackhead, not really surprising, or a homeless girl who had a bad day. Being a young kid who had a hard time feeling emotions, combined with the fact that it's a third-world country, even I just decided to ignore her at first. So ignoring her, I tried to cross her, but suddenly she screamed out. I was bamboozled and stepped back and looked at her. She was in that same position. So I tried to cross her again, thinking it was some crackhead thing. She screamed again. So the naive me just went up to her and asked her what her problem was. I feel really embarrassed at my stupidity. She suddenly looked up, and I saw her face. We were like 3 inches apart. I saw that she had nothing on her face, not even a mouth. But somehow she was still screaming. And the people on the gully were still ignoring her, but this time they were ignoring me as well. I booked it as fast as I could. I didn't even look back. I was an athletic kid, so I just ran all the way home. But being a kid who has a hard time understanding emotions, I was not really scared enough. I just went to the kids who were playing and took them with me to check the crazy girl out. But there was no one on the gully. Not even the random people walking around were there. The oldest one among us said that it's probably a crackhead or something along those lines. So we got back home after the electricity was back, and I told this to every one of my family. Only my mom and my grandma believed me. My grandma even made me drink some ritualistic thing one should drink after facing a scary event, whether paranormal or not. It has now been 10 to 11 years since, and to this day I don't know what happened. It was the most outrageous experience of my life, so I'd never forgot it. Even my grandmother and mom remember what I said to them. I have been to that gully many times in these 10 years, but nothing ever happened again. Except for a man who lived at the house by the gully, who has become batshit crazy, and the owner of the house died of a brain stroke. The house is now under construction, and no one lives there. 4. I have lived in California, and have my whole life. As soon as I had my driver's license, I would save as much as I could, so that I could go down to Disneyland at least once a year. It was a lot cheaper to do that back then. I'm a Disney freak. When this happened, I was almost 22, and I was still living in my same first apartment. It was in the South Bay area of the Silicon Valley. Earlier in the day, I had driven into the North Central Valley to pick up my best friend at the time. We were going to Disneyland, and this was her first time. She was so ridiculously excited that I didn't mind the fact that I had to drive 3 hours north to go back down south again once I had her in tow. We were finally officially on our way at about 9 p.m. so that we could avoid any traffic. We were going to make a quick stop by Isla Vista, where my partner was staying for school, to catch a nap and pack him up so we could all go together. I always took Highway 101 when I was driving down to Santa Barbara. It took longer than taking the I-5, but I honestly just preferred it. This trip was no exception. A few hours into the trip, as my friend and I were blasting Disney music to get us in the mood and singing along, it was right after we had passed through King City that I began to see strange shapes along the side of the road. I didn't think too much of it at the time, attributing it to the tully fog beginning to settle onto the highway. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, there was a deer carcass right in front of us on the highway. Without enough time to avoid it, and probably going a little bit too fast, we ran right over the thing. Instantly, my car began to reek of decay. Honestly, it was horrific. Pulling over under the nearest street lamp to make sure there was no damage to my car, we called animal control to report the corpse, and pulled the putrid deer meat out of my front bumper and grille. Soon enough, and only a little nauseous, we were back on our way. I remember that I started to feel off about then, but thought it was just me being sick from the deer smell. At the time, I didn't even entertain how strange it was that there was a rotten deer carcass in the middle of a busy highway. They usually are prompt about at least removing those things to the side of the road. About 20 minutes later, the strange white shapes moving, almost rolling, along the side of the road became much more prevalent. There were zero traces of any fog, and with the smell almost completely gone, the sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach was only getting worse. I knew something was off, but didn't want to say anything about it because my friend was a little bit of a scaredy cat. Then I saw what looked like a body wrapped in gauze roll onto the shoulder from an embankment. But when I looked for it again in the rearview mirror, there was nothing there. I had slowed down considerably at this point, which tipped my friend off that there was something wrong. I could feel her nerves rising almost instantly. When finally I pulled my eyes back onto the road in front of me, that is when I saw it, and my friend saw it too. On the side of the road, a man was standing beneath one of these sparsely placed street lamps. He was no ordinary man either. He was half as tall as the lamp, making him at least 3 meters tall. The not actually a man was wholly unclothed, but lacked any genitalia at all. Despite this, I more or less just understood he was male. He was emaciated to the point of being almost skeletal, but still managed to be standing perfectly straight. His hair was long and wispy like cobwebs, and his skin looked like white tanned leather stretched over his bones. As we passed him, the only part of him that moved was his head, to turn and keep watching us. His eyes looked almost as if they were chrome metal. I kept my eye on him through the view mirror, watching him get further and further away until we crested over the hill, and we were no longer able to see him. In the passenger seat beside me, my friend was sobbing uncontrollably, which to me meant she had seen him too. Not wanting to stop, all I could do was offer her my hand and floor it. I tried to get to my partner's house as fast as I could. We spent several minutes not saying a word. I wanted to say something, but trying to wrap my brain about what I had just seen left me speechless. At some point, the radio had been switched off, leaving the only sound in the car the sound of her sobbing. What happened next more or less happened at the same moment. Without even a shudder, my friend abruptly stopped crying and almost threw herself at the window control on her door, with one hand and frantically trying to buckle her seatbelt with the other. Her belt had been on the whole ride. She was particular about seatbelt safety. Before she could even reach it, the window was already halfway down, and she was scrambling to keep it from lowering any further. She screamed something about not letting it take her and eventually got the window to roll back up. At the moment I saw her begin to move, I could hear the window was already going down. My hands were nowhere near the window controls on my side of the car. They both have been white-knuckled on the steering wheel since I saw the man. At the moment I heard the window going down, I heard a raspy, biting whisper in my ear that said, "I'm gonna pull your friend out of that fucking window." After hearing the voice, I slammed on my brakes and swerved onto the shoulder. By the time we stopped, the window was up, and my friend was sitting back shock-white, wide-eyed in her seat. I was livid. I turned on the seemingly empty back seat, and in almost a growl, I spat out the words, "Get the fuck out of my car, you are not welcome here!" I never thought that anything would answer me back, but at that moment, both my friend and I heard it, the same voice that had whispered in my ear, "Fine." That was all it said before I could feel something had changed. I floored it again, calling my partner as my friend began to sob again. I instructed him to do some warding things on his room before hanging up, and desperately trying to build a protective bubble around the car. We still had an hour or so to go before we reached Isla Vista, and honestly it was one of the longest hours of my life. Eventually my friend became more lucid, and we talked about what happened to her. She told me that she did not know why, but all of a sudden her seatbelt unbuckled, and she just knew something was going to try to pull her out of the window. I told her what I heard and confirmed that we both heard the response to my demand. We eventually made it to Isla Vista, and decided to pack up with my partner and continue straight down to Orange County. Nothing else happened on the trip down, and we eventually got back to feeling the excitement for Disneyland. We all had an absolute blast, almost completely pushing what happened from our minds. We took the same route back home as well, and didn't see a single thing out of place. I have made that drive probably 100 times between Disney and visiting friends and partners in Southern California. And to this day, that is the one and only experience I have ever had on that drive. 5. So I am employed as a policeman, and I work the night shift in a tiny little town. The population here barely breaks 1,000. Needless to say, I know the town well enough to be able to tell when something is off. Near the center of town there is the old school they used before they built the new elementary and high schools. The building is listed as a historical site, and the building can't be demolished, but due to asbestos, renovations would cost the town too much to be worth the work. This school fits within feet of the public library, and behind it sits the town's fairground. It isn't an official fairground, but every year they had bull riding and small child shows they put on in the summer. With all those details out of the way, I will explain what happened. I noticed a backlight to the library, of which is not normal since it wasn't all night, and it isn't a motion light. So I parked on the north side of the old school grounds. I walked through the fence and had to pass the school to get to the library. I would stop every few feet and listen because the gravel was so loud. When I stopped the second or third time, I thought I heard a squeal in the school like a door. And at first I didn't think anything of it, since I figured I was hearing things. The town just replaced all the windows on this building, so I thought I wouldn't hear the inside. When I investigated the light and found all the doors locked, I was walking back around to my car. As I walked by the school again, I heard a noise in the building again, and I stopped and listened and shined my light, noticing a basement window was broken out. So when I walked up to the window, I looked down in and didn't see anything. I kept walking, and I heard the squeal again. It reminded me of those bathroom doors in schools that the hinges always squealed really loud and echoed. When I came around the corner, I saw two cats housing in the dirt. They stopped to watch me, and then both of them turned and looked at a door I couldn't see myself because it was around another corner. One hissed, and they both bolted away from the school, which put me on edge. I know this school is absolutely not in use, nor are there any plans to use this school anytime soon. Also, the local kids and homeless don't come here, ever. It's a landmark the city as a whole really admires, and hasn't ever been an issue with breaking and entering for a long time. So when I came around the corner, I saw the door, and I walked up to it to see what the cats had run from. I looked for other animals, but that didn't make sense, because they looked up as if someone was standing in the window of the door, not like they would if it were a raccoon or a dog that ran off without me seeing. When I looked in the window with my light, I could see a gigantic Raggedy Andy painted on the wall, and I assumed this was the kindergarten section or something. And then I stepped back from the door, getting ready to leave, and I heard whistling. It wasn't really loud, but it was loud enough to make me stop. That little voice in the back of my head was talking now, and telling me I was just hearing things. But the dude that likes to dump a fear of the unknown told me to go back to the door. So I went back and listened again, and I know it was whistling, and not like the squeak of an animal or object from the inside. It got louder when I came to the door again, and it had a tune, but I don't know how to describe it. So now, thinking someone is in the school, I went around and checked all the doors, including the second floor door that I had to climb the rusty metal stairs that were more like a death trap. When I couldn't find a way into the school, I checked it all over again, and when I left, I couldn't figure out what it was. The whistling had stopped, and I even hung outside for a few minutes without my light on, just watching, figuring if someone was inside, they would eventually need to use a light to get around or back out. But there was nothing after 20 or so minutes, so I got in my car, circled the block, and parked down the way with my lights off, to watch for someone to come out at some point. But no one did, and there haven't been any lights inside. I know this story seems kind of boring compared to others, but working nights sets you on edge, and for all the things I know I experienced before, this was in my top 5 bone-chilling moments while working. I wanted to debunk the noise and the cats, but I wouldn't even know where to start with it. I can't explain what happened. Hope you enjoyed hearing it. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Paranormal Stories, episode 201. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. I grumbled about this in the video yet? I don't think I have. I'll do it here. Now, as you heard me mention, my windows apparently needed some sort of repair work. Apparently there'd been some sort of error in the manufacturing process. So a number of the windows that were installed 2 years ago, it took them that long to get around to it, needed some sort of sealant or something, right? So they came around, did that. That was fine. That was quick. No bother there. Today, or rather, let's see, it would have been Monday morning, I'm awoken by a phone call. And apparently they're right outside my door to inspect the work. No letter, no phone call a couple of days prior to arrange an appointment, just at my door, wanting to inspect the windows. So that was annoying. They woke me up, and I think because they kind of startled me and woke me up, I just kind of went with it and let them in instead of telling them where to go, which was my second instinct once, after what happened next. So they come in, and bear in mind I wasn't expecting them, so thankfully I hadn't put all my blinds back up yet. I think I'd put 2 of them up. Certainly the one in the living room, because the main room of the house, you obviously want that. You want that to make sure that the house looks like it's occupied. And so the guy came in, and instead of saying to me, "Oh, excuse me, sir, could you remove that, please?" or trying to remove it himself, he started fiddling about with it and broke it. So now I have a blind on the living room window that is useless. It's broken off at the side, on the right-hand side, so it no longer is actually held in the socket that holds it. It's kind of dangling down. Thankfully, I had the support in the middle, so it didn't come all the way down. So that meant I, who has been avoiding going up the street since lockdown started in March, that's 5 months or whatever it was, have to now go out and buy a new blind, because it's quicker than ordering it online, and there's no guarantee I'll get the one I want online. So I had to do that today, and that was fun. I mean, I did take advantage of having to go out, and I popped in a few other places, but it's still a trip I'd have rather not made. Okay, I'm going to stop grumbling on for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.